we are fortunate to have a CVA presenter with us. I'm going to bounce out of this for just a moment. Patty Hanford with Webco Industries. I have a short bio for her. She began her work as a volunteer coordinator with the Jinx Public Schools. And her responsibilities as volunteer coordinators were to administer the volunteer students and parents from middle school through high school for the entire Jinx school system. I'd have to say that's probably a pretty good job, or a very busy job. After that, she came to work for Volunteer Tulsa for 1 year as a program facilitator, and then she went to work for Webco Industries in Human Resources. She received her CVA certification in 2010. Patty currently holds an associate degree and is working on her bachelor's degree at NSU at Broken Arrow. Yes. And she is, I think we're right on this, she is the 2009 Volunteer Administrator of the Year as awarded by Volunteer Tulsa. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Sign in, sign in, sign in.
Go ahead and sign in. We've got
Grab your
time.
stuff.
Now, Patty, if you'll just come on up, I'll load your PowerPoint presentation. Patty's presentation this morning will be about creating your own volunteer handbook.
Patty, would you like somebody to drive for
Want me to
you?
drive for you?
Yes,
You just
would.
say click. And I'll
Say
click.
when?
Okay.
Click.
I kind of liked the GPS. We're going to talk a little bit about handbooks and why we need them for our volunteers. Kind of like that GPS kind of thing because I don't know if any of you have ever gone into an organization and even a job, like a paid job, where you've walked in and they've said, okay, you go over to that desk and there's a bunch of paper over there and you start working on that. And you have no idea where to go. You have no idea who to talk to. You have no idea the network of people that you need to, that are at your disposal or your resources so that you can get your job done. So the GPS is, we're kind of, you want me to stop walking around?
No.
GPS is kind of going to give us that guidance to send our, not have our volunteers out wandering in the wasteland of the unknown. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about why do organizations need a volunteer handbook, and where do you start to create one, and what needs to be included. Why do organizations need a volunteer handbook? Volunteer training. We talked a little bit about that GPS, that guiding you through the process of where you need to go to get things, what you need to do to get your job done, who your resources are, who the departments are in the particular areas that you need to work with. So that orientation to the whole organization as pertains to getting their job done. And expectations. What do we expect from the volunteers that come in and work for us? If we don't clearly define the expectations, that can set us up for some of the bottom part, the risk management issues that we have. Volunteer retention. It is well known that if somebody feels like they know what is expected of them, they know how the organization works, they have a clear mission statement, what your purpose is and why you're doing what you're doing, that they're going to get that connection. They're going to start feeling more connected to what you do, how you do it, and then they're going to be more likely to stay and work with your organization. And risk management. One of the things that I found from moving from not-for-profit into the corporate world and going from volunteer management to human resources is that they are so alike. I always heard that basically volunteer managers are human resources professionals that aren't acknowledged, that job code's not out there for us, right? In the last couple of years, I have really found that out. The risk management part of what you do as a professional for your organization is huge, absolutely huge. The same laws and policies, procedures, and codes that pertain to human resources for paid employees pertain to volunteers also. So you have to be really careful when you're looking at discrimination, or you're looking at somebody representing your organization and not representing it appropriately. Those risk factors And what we call ourselves as HR professionals, a lot of time is just, we're risk managers. We're the people that are going to say, hey, this is the risk involved, and then we measure that risk and decide what we're going to do. So where do you start? What is a volunteer handbook? Well, it's going to acclimate the volunteers to how things are done in your organization. Every organization's different. We're going to look at what's expected, the network of resources that they have. Then we're going to, it's going to be a manual that includes policies and procedures that affect our volunteers. Dress code, reporting, how to report off if they're not going to be there. Sometimes I know Catholic Charities, you guys depend on these people. If they can't be there, how do they report off? If they need to take a leave of absence, those kinds of things. And include what they can expect from you. How are you going to help them? How are you going to support them? How are you going to work with them? What it is not. This is my big part here. What it is not. First of all, it's not your job description. It's an overall view of the whole entire organization. What you are looking at specifically. You've been in volunteer employee orientations before. Everybody been in employee orientation? That gives you a broad overview of what the company is like. So we're going to be doing the same thing with the volunteer handbook. We're giving them a broad overview of the basics. It's by no means comprehensive on all the policies and procedures, but it's the important ones that they need to know right off the bat. It's not expensive. It doesn't have to be expensive at all. Make sure that you're looking at, can you put it on your website? Is it something that volunteers can have access to when they're at home? They can go to your website, look at your volunteer handbook. They can review it at that point and sign off that they've reviewed it. It's not something you have to read to them verbatim. It's something that's at their disposal. It can be just something that is copy paper with the information in it, so it does not have to be expensive at all. The website one is what we use as a corporation. We use a website-based employee handbook. So. Okay. Bureaucratic. It does not need to be written in $10 words. We deal with a wide variety of individuals in the work that we do. So we need to make sure that it's going to be something that is understandable by all the individuals. It doesn't need to be all the legal jargon. It can be something that Nancy, you and I can understand. We can read it and it's very clear. It's on our level. So it doesn't have to be all the lawyer legal jargon. And boring. Oh my gosh. How many times have we seen something that is just no pictures, no white space, it's just boring? And when you read something like that, do you remember it? Do you remember it? I don't remember it. If I have pictures to associate something with, then I'm going to remember that a little easier. If I have, the respect letters that I go down and have them pertain to something, then I'm going to remember that more easily than I am if I'm going to have just paragraphs of paper or information to read. So I'm not going to remember that. Pictures are fantastic. Not only does that give the information that you need, it also lets people see what your organization is about. So pictures are phenomenal. Testimonies from other volunteers. That's perfect to have that in there. That would be great. At the bottom, inspirational quotes that they've given about what they've done, what they've gotten from your organization. Perfect in a volunteer handbook. Sorry, I keep saying employee because that's what I'm used to talking about. Okay. What should be included? Organizational overview. We've talked a little bit about that. Your mission statement, organizational charts, staff information, phone numbers. One of the things that even when I went to the corporate world, I didn't have anybody's phone number. I didn't know how to get in touch with IT. If you have a problem, who do I call if I have a problem? Who do I call if I need to order paper for the copier? Who do I talk to? That organizational chart and phone numbers are so important. Professionalism and ethics. Volunteers need to remember that they are representing your organization when they're volunteering for you. They could be doing a volunteer fair, they could be out for some of the pet organizations, they could be out at like PetSmart, something like that. They need to remember that and to know what your expectations are of them when they're out in the public representing your organization. Accepting compensation, gifts, what's your company or what's your organization's policy on that? How do you make sure those clearly defined expectations again? The role of the volunteer. I keep talking about the expectations. How many of us have had a volunteer that has stepped outside the boundaries of what we expect of them? Has anybody had that? That's one of those critical conversations, one of those crucial conversations that this is really good to refer to if you have to have that conversation with a volunteer. This is your backup. This is something, these are your roles, these are your duties, this is what we expect from you. So the role of the volunteer. Workplace safety. Where do they go if there's a tornado? We live in Oklahoma. So where do they go if there's a tornado? What do they do if there's a fire? Do you use chemicals in your organization that could be hazardous? Do you have to have an MSDS manual at your organization? Those kinds of things that you may not think about as a volunteer manager, but as an organization, those are safety hazards that could be involved with your volunteers. Service standards. Basically, this is just your, we're not going to discriminate against people that we serve. We're not going to discriminate against volunteers that we accept. We do have our screening processes, things like that. But that anti-discrimination policy is very, very important. Another thing that would be, I think that's in the next slide, but they're professional boundaries. Again, making sure that the volunteer knows clearly what their role is within the organization. Supervision and support. Special accommodations. Do we have the ability to give special accommodations to a volunteer? We're under ADA rules. So do we have the ability to accommodate a particular maybe disability? Do we have the ability to accommodate a wheelchair in our facility? Do we have the ability to, maybe we have somebody that is hard of hearing, but we were trying to see if we could do it on phone. Do we have the ability to accommodate reasonable accommodations? Those are the things we have to look at with employees. Those are the same things you need to look at when you're dealing with volunteers. Can we provide reasonable accommodations for that, or do we need to find another position, or is that volunteer not going to fit our needs? But you need to be careful that you've clearly defined that information. Confidentiality. I know all of us deal with confidentiality in some shape or form. At the school, it was huge for me. With I had parents. Research in Jeans is very it's a gossip mecca. So every PTA mom goes to research too, and that's kind of generalizing. But they all go to research and they all know each other. And I had two moms that had just passed each other, and I always said they needed chatting lanes so that you could get your carts around them. But we had two moms that saw each other, didn't mean anything disrespectful, to breach confidentiality or anything with this situation. When they were passing each other, they were like, oh yeah, I'm changing names. I saw Timmy in Mrs. Smith's class today. Well, Timmy's grandmother was standing behind them and heard them talking, went home and told, Mrs. Smith is a special ed teacher, went home and told her daughter that two volunteers were talking about her son being in special ed and research in the aisles. Not even the intention. Timmy had been sick, they volunteered in the classroom, they were like, hey, I saw Timmy in Mrs. Smith's class today, he's back at school, he's okay. Grandma didn't take it like that. So I get a phone call about them breaching confidentiality. So confidentiality policies are huge, and just making sure that they, elevators, grocery stores, those kinds of places. Wouldn't have been bad if they'd say, hey, saw Timmy at school today. Not a big deal. Or I saw Timmy today. Not a big deal. But when they got specific about where they saw him, that was when we started to breach confidentiality, because that told anybody around him that Timmy was in special ed, that knew Mrs. Smith was a special ed teacher. So, confidentiality. Timesheets, like I said, leave of absence. If somebody needs to take a leave of absence, how do you handle that? What do you do with that? If they need to report off, how do you do that? How do they report off? Volunteer separation and dismissal. This is something that's always sad, but very needed at some points. Some points it's a voluntary resignation, and some points it's not a voluntary resignation. Again, at the school, I had a volunteer that had gone to volunteer at one of the intermediate schools, and she left the gym and went to work in the office in her gym clothes, which consisted of spandex bike shorts and a sports bra. That was it. She was volunteering with 5th and 6th grade boys and girls in the office. I think every little 6th grade boy that was in that particular school was in the office that morning. So that was one of my conversations where it was not a voluntary resignation, but one that we requested that she not come back. So, crucial conversations and the backup that you need. How are you going to handle those situations? What do you do? Same thing with an employee as a volunteer. How do you handle that? Do you have that person, do you do write-ups? Do you do conversations like written, or do you do written, or do you do oral? How do you discipline a volunteer? And if you have the backup to cover you on that, if you do. So the reasons for immediate dismissal are very, very important. Required and reporting. I know hospice, there's a lot of reporting that goes on with hospice organizations, and there are deadlines that have to be met. So how do you do that? What do you expect of that volunteer? Okay, bottom part of this, first of all, I know that each and every one of you just have all the time in the world to do nothing but make this volunteer handbook, don't you? Yeah. No. So, how do you get it done? How are we going to do that with everything else that we have to do and make sure that it's accurate, it reflects what we want it to reflect, and then it's legal? So there are things out there, there are resources out there. Kind of what I wanted to talk a little bit about at this point is get your volunteer base, you know, your office volunteers, people that work with you, your lead volunteers, and get them to help you with this process. Assign each person a section. We're going to look, when we're looking at all of this, one of the things that I'm going to do in just a second is show you a couple of examples. And on those examples, the table of contents. If you assign 4 volunteers a couple of pieces of the table of contents, they develop that, and then you put it all together, that cut your time in half. There are all kinds of online resources out there, tons of them, to give you templates, examples, all kinds of things. So the time part, don't let that be overwhelming. Also, if you want to, look at this and say, what do I need? What's my most important portion of this right now? What is my priority? And as you can, you add to it. It's one of those projects and process that we continually look at and we continually revamp and revise, especially as situations arise. And that's one of the things that I look at all the time. How am I going to, I have different situations every day. Volunteer-wise, I did. Employee-wise, I do. Along the same lines, it's really funny. But I do have different situations which make me look at, okay, that policy may need to be tweaked a little bit, or this procedure may need to be tweaked a little bit. How am I going to do that? Okay. Online resources. There are, like I said, tons of resources out there that have They have templates, there's examples, things that are already written. I completely and utterly believe in not recreating the wheel. The internet is a wonderful resource for us. I thank goodness every day that I have that at my disposal so that I can do research and find out different things about policies and procedures and crucial conversations and those kinds of things. So I'm going to pull up a couple of examples real quick. These are just a couple that I saw when I was looking through, and I've got copies of these. I just didn't want to print them, and I can send you the links to these also. I didn't want to copy everything because it's a lot of paper, and I kill trees on a regular basis. This was from Miami's Children's Hospital, the pictures. So make sure you have releases for anybody that you're using pictures in your handbooks. Make sure you have those. See, it's not anything that's going to be boring. So you've got at the very beginning your interview checklist, which I thought that was kind of neat. I liked that portion of this particular example. Do you have everything you need from this person? Do you have all of their, if they're going to have immunizations, what do you need from them? What kind of assignment they're going to be sent on. This is an index, basically a table of contents. Very important so that they know really quickly where to go to get the information that they need. Cultural diversity and sensitivity, really, really big considering we all deal with multiple cultures and races, and all of that can be very, very sensitive. The hazardous material and MSDS, I never thought about that as a volunteer administrator until I got into the corporate world and started looking at what am I going to do if somebody has a chemical spill. I mean, even as much as bleach, you can have somebody that could be allergic. And what do you do in that situation? So this is very, very important. And then the rules and tips for volunteers. Important numbers to remember. Pictures again. The mission. I'm not going to go all the way through this. A welcome letter, making sure that they know that we appreciate them, that we thank them, and that we really want them here. And what a volunteer is, I keep talking about the clearly defined expectations and roles of the volunteer. What do we as an organization expect for that volunteer to give to our organization? Okay, that's one. And then this one was a very basic, again. The welcome letter, table of contents, dealing with the media. Do we have volunteers that deal with the media? And what is our procedure for that? I know there are a lot of times when we have different media needs. If we have an event going on, if we have something happen, how are we going to have our volunteers deal with the media? Do they refer it back to us? How do they handle that situation? Because those kinds of situations come up very, very unexpectedly. And then your appendix. I liked this too. It gives your all the forms that you need at the back of the handbook so that they have them readily available. The purpose. Why do we have the handbook? A little bit about the organization. And then what do we expect from our volunteers from this particular organization? I can email those to everybody if they would like. Okay. I keep talking about crucial conversations. I had the pleasure of attending the state HR convention in May. And one of the things that they talked a lot about were crucial conversations. And there actually is a book out there and a whole series of training on how to have those crucial conversations. How do we fire a volunteer? Anybody ever had to do that? Is that one of the hardest things you've ever had to do?
Kind of depends on the situation, and I mean, I work for the police department, so it's like, look, consequences, you know, your actions have consequences. And so I think what's hard is when, you know, I had one instance where I really thought the volunteer, I probably would have done the same thing the volunteer did, but it just happened to the wrong person. And so they're like, get rid of them. So I went in, I'm like, well, think about it, you know, yeah, you might not have liked it, and yeah, it probably went professional, but any other, the rest of us paid employees would have reacted the same way in that situation.
Right.
Well, I did, you know, release them, but I also let them know, you know, you're a volunteer, I've been told to, you know, let them know. But I have a really nice firing letter. I will never, and you know, thank you for your service, blah, 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 and then
We don't
it's
need
down.
anymore.
Yeah, Tavia wrote that for me, so yeah.
Can you send that to us?
Yes, I
Can you
can.
forward that letter to us all?
Okay, you want to send that out to me? Even me? Maybe I need that letter with my employees. Thank you for your service, bud. Oh, that's good. That is one of the, even with paid employees, that's one of the most difficult conversations to have with somebody. So that is, when you have the backup of policies, procedures, handbooks, rules that you can fall back on to make those or have those conversations, that's one of the things that they talked about, is making sure that you have the backup so that you can refer to it when you're letting somebody go or when you're having to discipline or counsel somebody. So if you have that, it makes it a lot easier. It takes the emotion out of it. You step back, it is what it is. These are the rules, these are the policies, this was a violation, and this is a consequence. So that step in your disciplinary actions, it makes it much easier when you have something to refer back to. So that whole part of risk management and the crucial conversations, being fair and consistent. That's one of the things I ask myself. An employee comes to talk to me and says, I have this situation and I need this done. First thing I'm thinking about is, am I going to be able to be fair and consistent? Am I setting precedents for anything else that I do with any other employees? So you have to take that emotion out of it. I get attached to people, I get attached to my employees, just like I got attached to my volunteers. So you take that emotion out of it, fair and consistent, how do I follow the rules? And then that makes those conversations a lot easier to have when you're actually just stepping to that. Again, confidentiality. I don't know any of us that don't have to deal with that. Police department, schools, you're dealing with HIPAA information back there, all kinds of stuff, all of your, that confidentiality and what are our risks and what kind of information, what level do we have our volunteers having access to that kind of information. Boundaries, we talked about that. The boundaries are really, really important, setting those clearly defined volunteer boundaries. And access to financial information and financial assets. Are volunteers taking money at events? How do we monitor that? How do we limit the risk for them and the risk for us? How do we make that a win-win situation? So that's really important. And the organization's reputation. So all of these things, all of these risks, we've talked about items that can be included in the handbooks that make these items, the risk a little less. You're always going to have risk there, but it decreases how much risk you have. They know, they've been told, it's been shared, the organization knows, the volunteer knows, then that helps in any of those risk management situations that you have to deal with. I got a lot of this information from the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. It was very helpful in looking at that, and actually is really helpful in my current position also. So, you know, brings up things. It's amazing to me how similar the two positions are. It really is interesting to watch. In summary, a lot quicker than what I thought I would be. Have human resources review your handbook, because they're the ones that are going to be looking at it from a different viewpoint than what you are. You're looking at it from that recruitment. I've got to get people in here, I've got to get people working, I'm getting them to work for free for me. So how are we going to do that? HR can take a look at your handbook and they know the laws, ADA, the Fair labor standards, all those kinds of things that they can help guide you through that process. And even though volunteers are not paid, we talked about that a little bit, they're still, I like to call them pseudo-employees. You still have to treat them with the same laws and regulations that we have. I didn't even know there was a Volunteer Protection Act of 1997 till I started doing some research that limits the liability, the tort liability in volunteers when they're working for not-for-profit organizations or government agencies. So there are laws that govern what we can do and how we work with our volunteers, which is another one of those risk things, because if you're not abiding by those, then your risk in those areas can be higher than what you want it to be. And managing expectations, both of the volunteer and of the organization. Maybe what your organization is expecting out of this volunteer is completely unrealistic. Maybe what the volunteer is expecting to do for your organization is completely unrealistic. So managing those expectations is probably one of your most important jobs, I feel. Because if we manage those expectations, then we're going to be able to encourage them to stay. If everybody's realistic about what they're doing and they know, that's the biggest thing, communication. If they know where they're going to be, what they're going to be doing, and how they're going to be working, that makes them happier in what they're doing, and it's going to make them want to stay with your organization. Any questions? Does anybody have any questions?
Well, I guess I didn't realize that the volunteers, I mean, we have the little disclaimer that, we can accept whoever, but like the bottom line, for instance, we had one gentleman that, he went through all the interview process, we did the background check, and the background check came back and he didn't qualify. So I just said, your background check came back and, you're not eligible. Well, he also had a volunteer position at the airport, he had a volunteer position at the sheriff's office. Well, what he did, he really shouldn't have been working at either one of those places. So anyway, he actually got an attorney trying to sue the city of Broken Arrow for a job. And they're like, they can take whoever they want to take. You didn't meet the qualifications. Well, but in the process then, our deputy chief also thought that we should notify the sheriff's office and notify the airport because of the background check that came back. So then he lost both of those volunteer jobs as well. Because of our thorough, I know. Well,
Thanks,
this was many
Lisa.
years
Great
ago.
job.
Sorry.
You're the
This
best.
was many years ago. And it was, that was deputy chief. Look, he's higher hated than me. And it was in their lack of not doing the background check that, but when we discovered it and we knew because he listed where else he volunteered, he just said they need to know, so anyway, it didn't go any further than that, but that's kind of the way I look at it. It's like, bottom line, I decide, really,
Now see,
I'm trying to pull her in, but I'm like, I'm the one who decides if they're going to do it or not, and I don't really feel like I have to give them a reason why. Just like you don't have to give someone a reason why you didn't hire them.
right, and you don't. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Okay.
But just disclosing background check information to other entities, I wouldn't do it.
I did not do that.
I would not do it. Because that is a confidentiality issue. And I know that as a human resources professional, that I would get big, huge trouble for that because they sign the authorization for us to do the background check. That is for our information. That I probably would have had some issue with. Because basically the only people that know what the results of the background check are our HR manager, which is me. So I don't know, that would have been a confidentiality issue.
And that was many years
Many
ago.
years ago.
But, still, he was mad because he wasn't even as mad that he lost his other volunteer job as that he couldn't volunteer with us. Well, then that, to me, raises red flags. Why do you want to volunteer so bad with us? Why do you want to do that so bad? So you said the Volunteer Act of 99, that kind of gives
97.
97?
That,
I need to
I
read
didn't, might want to look at that.
Yeah.
The Oklahoma Bar Association has a guide to laws about and for volunteers. Has a table of contents. Okay, Brenda, now you're gonna make me look old or put my little cheater glasses on because I can't see.
Not intended.
Volunteering for children, legal structure, leadership, liability insurance for volunteers, potential liabilities for the volunteer and the volunteer service. And this is from the oklahomabar.org. Oh, this is good. Strict liability.
Oklahoma Volunteer Handbook.
And the Oklahoma Volunteer Handbook. Volunteering for the government, volunteers and workers' compensation. That was one thing I didn't even touch on is workers' compensation. That's a whole other, probably 40-minute session is just on workers' comp for volunteers. And if they, your liability if somebody gets hurt. So that's would be a good resource for everybody to go to. We'll include that with this information. You had a question?
Yeah. Who reviews the handbook if you don't have a HR person?
A volunteer HR person. I'm kidding.
And seriously, remember, we're asking you all the time to evaluate the ways volunteers can help you. If you need an HR professional to do something specific, post that as a need.
There's an
All the
opportunity.
time.
I wouldn't mind,
We
I
have-
wouldn't mind reviewing somebody's handbook if they needed to do that.
Throw the need
Yeah.
out there and
Mhm.
somebody's gonna say, I can do that.
I have both sides of the coin there, so it gives me a different perspective. Margie, did you have a question?
I was just going to ask for information on the Volunteer Protection Act, to explain that a little bit more, but
That was one that I just found out when I was refreshing, because stepping out of the volunteer world and into the corporate world, now step back into the volunteer world, have to think differently. I was Googling some stuff in the last couple of days, just refreshing on different laws and things, different perspectives. And that came up, and I had no idea about that. That I've been doing volunteer management for years, have my CBA, and had no idea about that act. So what it does is it limits the liability, like the civil liability of a volunteer that's working for your organization. So it either limits or eliminates. So you can Google that and read more about it, but it was very interesting to me to get that information. And then this website that Brenda just pulled up, the oklahomabar.org, and the Oklahoma Volunteer Handbook. Very interesting. I'm sorry, Scott.
Here. Follow you wherever you go.
Anything else? Any other questions?
I think this has been very helpful, especially since you have been in nonprofits and then now you're in the real world is kind of how we're heading into like the human resources side. Because I really kind of bump up against our human resources a lot in, a lot of things. I mean, everything they ask, we do have a handbook, and actually this is perfect timing. We're getting ready to print some more, so we thought, let's go to this class, let's see what we're gonna do. But sometimes, I'm sorry to say, this human resource person, I'm like, chill out, our attorney has already, done the whole harmless and all that, it's like, and if you do have you lay it down, at the beginning, what your expectations are,
Exactly.
and you keep track of it,
The communication is key, and I think that the handbook is going to be your documentation of the communication. And that's the biggest thing that I see is with your handbook. That's going to be your backup. That helps minimize the risk. Any situation we get into, we're gonna have risk, because we're working with people that maybe we don't know that well. We're getting them into our organizations and learning about them and meeting them, having them work for us. So anytime you can prove that you've communicated your expectations, your policies, your procedures, that gives you your backup, that if anything does happen, that you have that documentation to cover some of the risk and to minimize it. So, yes.
okay, so our HR committee on our board just reviewed our policies and procedures for employees. It's now become huge. And in the past, I've just used the employee one for the volunteers. So do I pull out what I need to now, just pick it apart.
I think I would definitely, you don't want it to be so overwhelming that they're not going to want to volunteer for you, but you want it to be as comprehensive as you possibly can to make sure that you cover the situations that they would be in. Dress code's huge. Who would have thought that a mom would go into an office in her gym clothes, her sports bra, and her spandex black shorts? I wouldn't have. I would not have thought about that at all.
I work at the Performing Arts Center. You wouldn't be surprised when people walk in to watch a show in, so, I'm used to that.
I was flabbergasted. That was, I think, in my 3rd year of being volunteer coordinator at Jinx Schools, and I would have thought, never would I have seen that, but.
And we go over that in our orientation on the dress code. What's acceptable.
So, those kinds of things that I would pick and choose. I wouldn't, and like I said, time, none of us have a lot of time. So, pick and choose, and you can add as you see things come up that need to be added to it. Mike, did you have something?
Yeah, we have you were talking about what to put in your volunteer handbook, and we have a fairly thick volunteer manual, we call it. And it's a big production. But I don't give that to the volunteers when we do the orientation. I say there's a footnote at the bottom of one of the pages that says, a complete volunteer manual is available in the Support Services Office if you'd like to refer to it. Otherwise, we give them about 20 pages of a smaller abbreviated handbook that covers all the important things that we want. Is there any liability involved in that if they don't get to see the whole thick manual at first?
No, we don't even do that with employees. What we look at is the policies and procedures that are going to affect them the most. We have drug alcohol policies, really key, anti-harassment, reporting in, dress code, those kinds of things are covered. The smoking policies, those kinds of things, like a general overview, what's going to affect them the most or immediately. And then we have everything else listed on the website, and if you have a situation come up, here is the list. So you can go to that and refer to it. So it's the things that's going to affect them the most and the things that are going to affect them immediately. Anything else? Excellent. I do have a resources slide on here that will be the Crucial Conversations. I started to talk a little bit about that Crucial Conversations book, and the classes that go along with that are amazing, absolutely amazing to have those difficult conversations.
Is that Crucial Conversations, is that a book that's available on Amazon?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and they do have a seminar that they can come teach your staff, or you can go to get the tools and techniques. There's a whole, it's very interesting. It can help not only in your professional life, but in your personal life. And that was one of the biggest things that I took away from conference this year.
Excellent. Thank you, Patty. Great job.